I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nation people as the traditional custodians of the land, and for this episode in particular, the Yagara and Turrbal people. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
Life is not about science, it's not about food and wine, life is about relationships, and there is no better vehicle than the chance to sit down over a glass of wine with somebody in order to connect.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Tyson Stelzer is the acclaimed author of The Champagne Guide, a monumental work now in its 7th edition and widely regarded as the definitive manual on all things champagne. Alongside this, Tyson has dedicated his career to communicating the stories of land, people and time with impassioned articulation and poise. He is a true steward of his craft, and I'm very honoured to have him join me today. Hi Tyson, thanks for joining me.
That was an awesome introduction. Thank you, Shanteh. It's wonderful to connect virtually. Always a pleasure to connect with you over a drink in real life, of course. I think we met for the first time at the Len Evans tutorial many years ago, and it's great to have the chance to have this conversation with you today.
Well, it has been a little while in the workings, and I always prefer to catch up in person with you, but this is a true delight. I actually feel like I might learn a few things about you today as well. So we're going to go back a little ways to the start of your career. Let's go back towards kind of where you grew up and kind of where did wine enter the picture in your life?
Well, funnily enough, I grew up in two significant wine areas, but far too young at the time to have any interest in wine whatsoever. I was born in Hobart, grew up in Adelaide, and I remember childhood trips to the Barossa Valley to the kiddies' playground there. But it was only in later life when I was a teacher at a high school on the Gold Coast when I started spending my time visiting wine regions and gaining an interest in not just the wines, but the people and the places. And I became absolutely obsessed and impassioned with the way in which there was just an intrinsic link between vineyards and seasons and what went into the bottle and the way that that unfolded over time in the cellar. And it led me to a fascination with starting to try to understand what this incredible world was all about. And that ultimately led to crazy pursuits in my early 20s of trying to create cellars at home back when you couldn't buy wine cabinets, converting old fridges into cellars and all sorts. And people on the internet starting to get interested in how I did it. And that then kind of flew into opportunities to share what I'd done on websites. And then ultimately, I thought there's probably a book in this because I got sick of answering all the questions. And within some years, I found myself as a wine writer.
Wow. I mean, I'm trying to picture young, teenage Tyson, putting together it's hard to imagine, to be honest, but I'm no doubt you were a very remarkable young child. Tell me, before that kind of hit, was there anything else that you really were interested in? If you kind of didn't go down the wine route, what do you think you would have kind of studied?
Yes. So I did my studies in science and mathematics, as it turned out, which physics particularly, which isn't a particularly wine-related topic necessarily. But when I was at school, I was very interested in writing. I loved English, I loved reading, and I loved communication. And I looked into becoming a journalist. And I looked at the career options back then. And this is early 1990s when I was finishing my senior studies. And my careers advisor said, look, there's really not career openings in journalism short of pushing mail around a journalistic office. So they recommended against that, but I very purposely did a dual degree in arts and science because they said, look, if you want to go into something scientific, make sure you keep your language skills up because you love that, which I did. And then I thought, well, teaching is a good option because it gives me the chance to do what I enjoy, which is communicating, but also in a time and place where young people are so vulnerable, and to be able to be in a room with young people and to have the chance to be a role model and an influence during quite important years of their lives was something that I really reveled in and did that for 10 years. But in terms of wine-related activities at that time, I really didn't. So I certainly didn't come into wine writing by any of the traditional means. I wasn't a wine retailer, I wasn't a wine maker, I wasn't a sommelier. I hadn't done anything professionally in wine, but I had an interest in communicating it. And That meant that starting out in wine writing, I count March 2002 as my starting point because that was when I registered my business and published my first book. No publisher's interested in anybody without a celebrity reputation, and certainly not without any professional experience in the field or a publishing record. So I found myself then, and 23 years on, still a self-publisher.
Wow, absolutely baffles me to know that you had that kind of starting point. I can't imagine what the landscape was like at that time in Australia. Tell me about the idea of your first book. You've written 18 wine books. Tell me about the first one and kind of how you went about it, navigating getting it published.
I had no intention of writing a wine book, but I just got sick of all the questions from everybody wondering about how I'd done climate-controlled home cellaring on a very low budget. And I was active then on some of the discussion forums on the internet and met quite a few of my wine friends that way as it was. There was no such thing as a blog back then. So I thought, well, rather than answering all these questions countless times, I'll just create a website, which I did. And then I thought there really needs to be something that has wider access than just a website. So I wrote to James Halliday because I love his cellaring book and said, James, I reckon there's a real interest out there in a kind of do-it-yourself home cellaring style chapter in your book. Why don't you consider that? And he respectfully said, well, I've written the book and not really updating it, so not really an opportunity for that. So I then thought, well, maybe I need to do this myself. So I pitched the idea to every publisher that I could find contact details for, and every one of them said the same thing, which was that there was no interest and no commercial market for that sort of product from someone like me. So I thought, well, I knew a printer already in Adelaide who I'd worked with some other things before, and published my first book, 2,000 copies at the time, and then very quickly reprinted and did a second edition. It's, as I say, the rest is history from there.
So you basically got told no from every corner.
Yes.
Was there a time you thought maybe I should just not do this because the experts are saying that it's not going to work?
Never. And that was probably a naive and stupid thing to have thought, because self-publishing, I mean, it's easier to write a book. It's easier to publish a book. Selling a book is another story altogether. But I knew my audience and I knew the people and the angles through which I could connect with them. And people like Hugh and Hook and Max Allen and James as well were all very kind in reviewing my book. And suddenly it became well known. So I suppose it's a funny thing, isn't it? The plunge of leaping from stable employment in a professional career with a salary and holidays and sick leave and everything else to going solo on your own in a world that I had a lot of interest in, but very little knowledge at the time, was something that was very exciting to me. But I knew that I needed to be better equipped to be able to do that. So before I published that book, I thought, look, if I'm aspiring to get into this in any sort of professional way, I need to know what I'm doing. So I spent every holiday traveling around Australia and just incessantly interviewing winemakers. I spent every weekend and every night. I was working 40 hours a week and teaching at the time, and at least 40 hours a week in wine every week of the year, often sleeping for just 3 hours a night, reading incessantly, writing incessantly, communicating on the discussion forums, which was an awesome way to get immediate feedback on my writing and realize what sort of things you can and can't say, which was an awesome training ground. And then I went to Europe because I thought, if I'm really to understand wine, I need to know what the global benchmarks are. So I wrote to Chateau Latour, I wrote to Rousseau in Burgundy, I wrote to all the great estates of Germany, I went to Krug, I went through the Rhone, I did the whole of the Loire Valley. And this is in 2000, at a time when there wasn't really even such a thing as emails. So I wrote to them all with pen and paper. I said, this is who I am. I love wine. I'm not professional, but I'd love to visit. And oh my gosh, the vertical tastings, the incredible barrel tastings, the time with the principals of many of the greatest wine estates in the world allowed me to establish the benchmarks in my tasting palette that meant that when I assessed wine in Australia, I could go, well, this is a great Pinot, but it's 94 points, not 99 points, because or because of Rousseau, Chambertin, things like that that allowed me at a very immature point in my wine career to really have those benchmarks in my tasting repertoire and to have the knowledge of where Shiraz actually comes from and where Riesling actually comes from, and to assess Australian wines in the same way. So that was very important for me as my own pursuit of attempting to come to a point of feeling professional confidence. And in preparing for that, I did 2 years of French language courses as well. So I was really trying to set the foundations in place to be able to properly feel confident in this myself before anybody else considers me any kind of an expert.
I mean, you are probably, if not the one of the people that works the hardest that I have, and you have always been that person that doesn't ever, not make use of any time in the day. It's truly hard to watch at times because you think, when does this guy turn off? But I think it must have been a time. But tell me a bit about, you wrote to these people. How did you get in the door? Or was it, a different world back then? Because these days that would be very difficult to kind of write to someone and ask, because they get a lot of requests. So what did you do that got you in the door?
I wish I could answer that question and to describe the difference. I don't know. I was amazed myself and I pinched myself at the time and still do over those opportunities. And I didn't have, as I do now, an introduction through their Australian importers or anything like that. And it was difficult then, as it is now, as a wine consumer, to gain access to these estates. But as I've found too, and as you know, the more you get to know wine producers, if they accept a visitor who is really interested and really keen to engage and to learn, that they love that opportunity too. And it's a wonderful chance to build connection and to appreciate wine that's more than just the science. And I've very much come at what I do from a scientific background. That's my training. That's the way my mind works. But to appreciate that there are intrinsic elements of wine that come from a link with place, as you articulated so beautifully in your introduction, a link with person, a link with time, which is it's not pseudoscientific, but it's not yet at a point where we can explain it scientifically. Len Evans could taste wines and say that is a Rousseau Chambertin 1945 because he knew those connections and could taste them and see them, smell them. I'm fascinated by that. And a large amount of what I write about wine is to try to get under the surface of understanding what it is that makes this wine so special, from where, how, and when it came, and to be able to communicate that through the privilege that I've received through the generous hospitality of so many winemakers over so long and so many countless hundreds of hours. And I'm often writing literally tens of thousands of words in interviews and visits on my keyboard, which Bluetooths to my phone, which I can have on my lap in the front of a four-wheel drive, bumping through a vineyard as easily as I can on a busy table filled with plates and glasses. And to be able to share that detail with the world, because I'm privileged to hearing depths of insights that perhaps not everybody else is, but to be able to put it in a form that is public and accessible has been an especially important passion for Champagne, the arguably the most closed of the great wine regions of the world.
Now, that is for sure. I just want to share with some of the listeners in case they're not aware, but your Champagne Guide is, like I said, definitive. And for someone like myself, as a sommelier that was trying to learn about Champagne and found so many facets, so many dimensions and layers, not only in how that wonderful, beautiful celebration of a drink comes together in the winery, but also about what's happening in the vineyards and what happened in history. It was just so intense that it was often overwhelming. Your book has so many layers of details, but it opened it for people to feel that they could find a way to learn to not only just love the drink, but to love everything about it. And it's truly, there is nothing unparalleled for your Champagne Guide. So tell me about the first edition. Tell me about how you went about that, and did you model it off anything else that was out there, or did you find there was nothing out there so you had to write it?
That's a good story too, but before I answer that, I just need to throw in a little anecdote. And the way that you've engaged with my book, because I think it's worth pointing out to our readers too, as we mentioned at the start of our discussion, we met at the Len Evans tutorial when I was hosting the Champagne Masterclass, and you're one of the students that year. And I didn't know you. And as I was presenting, each of the students, of course, has their chance to talk about the wines and to ask questions. And I thought, who is this person? You have an incredible, not only an amazing way to articulate wine, but also a wonderfully there's just this inspiration to the way that you communicate wine that is absolutely contagious. And I saw that in the room that day. And since then, I guess that's meant that we have a connection which has enabled me to have the confidence to invite you to be part of the James Halliday wine tasting panel. And that unfortunately came at a time when I was retiring, so I didn't have the privilege of working with you. But just wanted to point out to our readers the way in which I admire very much what you are doing and have done, and the way that your career has risen and risen since your days at Key too. And that connection has been something of our shared passion in the champagne world too.
Thank you. And, you know, I did say to myself when I was writing these questions, because you are one of my very top mentors in this industry, I thought, how do I approach this without getting, you know, too emotional or too kind of starstruck? Cool. And I thought, well, I'll just roll with it and we'll see how we go. I'll try to remain aloof, but thank you for those kind words. Tell me a bit about the first edition.
Yeah, for sure. So when I visited Champagne for the second time, I visited for the first time back in that first trip, as I mentioned, but I went back in 2010 on a family visit and thought I'll just grab the latest edition of one of my favourite annual champagne guides, which at the time had been written by Tom Stevenson and Michael Edwards in the UK, just to get a feel for what the best estates are and what the lay of the land is so that I can make sure I make the most of my visits. And lo and behold, I discovered that both books were out of print and both of those incredible mentors in my champagne journey were retiring. And so I then thought, oh, well, I'll just grab the next annual champagne guide. And lo and behold, there was not a single book in print that was an up-to-date guide to champagne. The latest was Andrew Jefford's wonderful book on France, which had a great chapter on champagne, but it was already 10 years out of date at that time. So I thought, that's odd. And when I went to Champagne and tasted all the wines, I was completely enamoured with where this region's going and what's happening. So when I came back to Australia, I thought maybe there's something in this. By that point, since my original cellaring guides, I'd written 3 books on the science of screw caps. I'd teamed up with Matthew Jukes in the UK, an incredible communicator and great friend. And we wrote 3 food and wine matching books, which were bestsellers at the time. I'd written a little book on the Barossa and a little book on Burgundy. And I thought maybe a little book on Champagne as a little one-off like the others were would be appropriate. So I thought, well, there's clearly a need for it. There's no annual Champagne guide in print. So I came back to Australia, contacted every importer with whom I had good connections at the time, and the samples came in and I could review everything that was here as well as everything that I'd seen in my trip to France. And so I creatively called this book The Champagne Guide. I thought everybody's doing everything electronically, printing costs a fortune, don't want to have to ship books around the world, so I'll just produce it as an ebook and that will be it. And this was November 2010. Within 2 weeks, I was inundated with requests for this book for Christmas, so I called my printer in Adelaide and said, can I print a book in now? And they said, sure. So I sent off, I reformatted my ebook, sent it off to them, and printed literally just 300 copies. I thought that will cover my orders for Christmas and that can be an ebook as it was first intended, and thought nothing more of it until a couple of months later, invitations for entries came for the Louis Roeder International Wine Writers Awards in the UK. And I thought, what have I done in the past year that's actually even eligible? Oh, there's that little champagne book. I'll flick that off to them, which I did. And before I knew it, I was on a plane to the UK to win International Champagne Writer of the Year, to be presented by none other than Michael Edwards himself, who was one of the judges. And if you recall, he was one of my great mentors in teaching me about champagne. I love his books and his writing. He's very honest and very down to earth and very knowledgeable, and 2 generations ahead of me in experience and knowledge. And he shook my hand and he said, well, it's good to see champagne communications in good hands now. I think I cried because, my gosh, what an absolute passing on of the baton. And I thought in that moment, okay, I need to do this properly. I can't write a book remotely from Australia about champagne and only visit for a few days. So I then spent an intensive amount of time in Champagne. I worked out I've been back to the region 50 times in the 15 years since that time, and spending increasing amount of time getting to know all the key players, because it's not a region that is prepared to tell all their secrets on first visit or even on 100th visit necessarily. But the more you learn, the more conversations you have, the more they trust you, the more you trust them, the more the details come out. And hence the exorbitant amount of information in my book, because I increasingly realise that it's not available anywhere else in that level of detail. So I will pack more in, and that's the reason that the new edition is 800 pages and the first edition was 150 pages. It's certainly grown.
I want to read some more statistics about the 7th edition. You have over 1,260 reviews. You did 1,687 tastings to get those reviews. You have over 142 houses across 880 pages and 460,000 words, which is on average about 6 novels.
Yeah, that's right. There's more words than ever, because when I interview the winemakers, and when I say interview, I use that in very large inverted commas, because often it's bumping through tracks in vineyards and in cellars and all sorts. So it's hardly sitting down for a formal interview as such. But there are so many insights that they give. And in a printed book, and I printed with Hardy Grant for many years, who are a great publisher, of course, with the Halliday books, and still my distributors globally, which is awesome. But I'm self-publishing again now because there was just no way that they could physically justify the scale of the book that I wanted to produce. It just doesn't work for any sane publisher's budgetary accounting department. So I took it back and self-published, and they do the distribution that I can't handle, because I wanted to include more words, and not necessarily just more wines, and certainly more wines and more producers too. But within each of those reviews, I was having to edit back a large number of words from what the winemakers would tell me, the interesting anecdotes, the stories and such. So I've added an extra section to each review now. There have always been 2 sections. The first is all of the numbers and the stats and how it's actually made, which have in bold at the top of the review. And then I have my review and the score under that, my description of the wine. But I've added in between a paragraph in italics, which is direct quotes from the winemakers, because often there are so many interesting stories that go differently with every vintage, with every cuvee, with every anecdote, with every year of their own evolution of learning, and the churning of experience in global changes in climate and wine tastes and politics and economics that have such a fundamental influence on champagne. I thought I need to include these, because that's the background that really sets the context to understanding each of these incredible wines. But what that means is sometimes it's an entire page on one wine, if the wine is worthy of the significance to have that many words attached to it.
Just incredible. And you mean, this isn't perhaps your intro to champagne book, but for anyone that has curiosity and love, it is just, you kind of fall through into the pages and you forget that you are sitting at home or on a train or on a bus, because it is so inviting and there is just so much for your heart and mind to be fulfilled with. I think that, one of the reasons I can see about why you've been led into these places is not only your way that you speak, your passion and the heart that you show, but it is also about your wealth of knowledge, but the way that you listen. And that really allows people to realize that when they spend their time with you, that it is going to be totally worthwhile. I do want to know, you've got 3 beautiful boys, your wife. Have you taken them to Champagne, and what do they think about the whole thing?
Absolutely. Let me comment on your first comment, and then I'll answer that last question as well. There are so many different approaches in the wine world, and because wine can be perceived as such an elitist thing, and because there are many people in the wine world with so much knowledge, it often becomes something that can be perceived as ostentatious or snobby or some level of superiority. And for me, wine has to be exactly the opposite, because ultimately, wine is about connection with people and about giving people the chance to feel relaxed and to celebrate life and to celebrate relationships and to celebrate what is so great about the world and nature and human experience in creating something wonderful from nature. And for that reason, for me, wine is the hero. It always has to be about the wines, and the people who make them are the heroes to be celebrated. As a wine communicator, it's not about me. I'm not the hero. And so in my words in the book, as you say, I'm a listener, I can write, I can transcribe verbatim in real time most of the time with the people that I'm visiting. And so I have the opportunity to include their words in their full, unadorned beauty and glory. And so it's all about them. And that means that for me, I'm the messenger. And it's a big task to compile so many words and so many reviews and to put them on my website, which has got the full catalogue of every book I've ever written, and to keep up with all that. But yeah, it takes a lot of time, day and night, often late at night, but it's very much worth it. And then within that, of course, because I spend so much of my time doing these things, the opportunity to let my family enjoy that as well is rare, but increasingly possible now because my boys are getting older. Lyndon is 16, Hewan is 14, and Vaughan is 9. And my wife Rachel and I took them to Europe for the first time late last year. And it was incredible for me to take them to not just Paris and to Italy and Germany, but especially to Champagne as the place that I have such a deep connection with and so many great friends. And for them to see where I go when I disappear so often and to meet the people who are my dear friends and my inspiration there, for them to visit the cellars and the vineyards and Residence Eisenhower where I take my groups in runs, was a really special experience for them. And to be able to go to the top Michelin-starred restaurants and to be immersed in that world was something that I wanted to inspire and challenge them with and to broaden their own little horizons from Brisbane, Australia.
Oh, I'm so thrilled that they got to do that. And I think, probably children are perhaps the most humbling people in our lives. But for them to really see you in action and to see what it's all about, I am sure that they will never, ever forget that moment and, go forward always thinking, holy crap, Dad's a big deal.
It's funny. I don't think of myself that way, of course, but I'm privileged for the opportunity to have the time of the greatest minds in the wine and sparkling world. And if anything is due credit for what I've been able to achieve, it's them.
Tell me a little bit. This is a little off topic and a bit random, but you do so much travel. Have you got the packing of your clothes and your art, the articles you need down to an art form?
I say to people, getting on a plane for me to go to work is like getting on a bus for anybody else to go to work, because that's what I do. I work from home and then I get on a plane and work from somewhere else. And so, yeah, I've got everything in my suitcase, all my toiletries, I've got duplicates of, things like that. So it's super easy. And then packing things in. I still, for the life of me, cannot find a suitcase I'm happy with because I travel so much and I've regularly got 2 suitcases. If they're not full of wine, they're full of books. So I've not infrequently got more than my body weight in luggage, which I lug around and cart and drag and so forth, and replace all the wheel bearings in my suitcases with rollerblade bearings because they're stronger and stupid stuff like that. But suitcases still break, and there's no easy way around that. And I'm not sure that I'm a particular exemplar of travel, but I just do it a lot and do what I need to do to make it work.
Look, I'm sure you've had this offer before, but I will happily be the pack horse. I will carry them on top of my head to be able to accompany you to some of these places.
Let's do it. Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about, in terms of the influential figures in your life, who kind of really, we talked a little bit about it earlier, but kind of who were some of those people that have helped you along your way? And in terms of where you're at now in your career, what's the importance about giving back?
I've got in my hand as we speak, because I'm in my office at home and I've got a massive library of wine books. James Halliday, Collecting Wine, You and Your Cellar. So this book is my first wine book. I was given it by 2 dear friends who've written a lovely dedication in the front of the book. And that was the book that first attracted me to the sheer inspirational joy of words around wine. And James Halliday has been for me, as I know he's been for you as well, a tremendous mentor and inspiration in wine communication. And it was under James that you and I did the Len Evans tutorial in different years, and I've judged with James many times as well, and very much respect and admire what he's done. And it was a tremendous privilege when he invited me to be his successor in editing his not just book, but an entire world of the Wine Companion, in terms of everything that business has achieved as the most significant communication vehicle for Australian wine that's ever existed in history. So James Halliday is first and foremost the person who led me to love wine communication. And as I was establishing a little bit of knowledge around wine, and as I mentioned, wrote some books on screw caps. I presented at the first International Screw Cap Forum in Blenheim in New Zealand in 2005, and in the audience was Matthew Jukes from the UK. I didn't know Matthew at the time, but everybody was referring to this guy in the audience. Every time someone said something significant, they'd kind of say, Matthew, what do you think of this? And I thought, who is this guy? And at the end of my presentation, he came up to me and he said, I'm Matthew Jukes. I've never said this to anybody before, but I want to work with you. That was the most brilliant presentation I've ever had in my life. And I thought, wow, that's incredible. So I then went to the UK and did some research on everything he was doing in the bookstores and read his books and such. And that led to a now 20-year partnership in writing books together and hosting our Great Australian Red competition, a wine competition to celebrate Australian Shiraz Cabernets. And Matthew has been for me a mentor not only in writing, but also in the crucial area of the ethics around wine and wine communication, because you don't do a degree in wine writing. There's no manual to say, these are the things that are appropriate to do and these are the things that aren't. When it comes to how we deal with samples and hospitality from wineries, how we deal with writing in a way that allows us to uphold integrity at the same time as running a business that allows us to feed our families. There are big questions around that. And every time I had one of those big questions, of which there are many, I go to Matthew and say, what about this? What do you think about that? This person's doing this. Is this okay? And he would say quite definitively what was appropriate. And I've come to test that over now 20 years. And those elements of integrity are crucial for what we do in terms of upholding the right relationships with everybody across the industry, and models that are the ultimate exemplars for the way that wine communication should be done. And that's something I've appreciated too about my relationship with you, that we can have honest and open chats about all of these things that there's just no formal way of doing otherwise. So I think that's very important for upholding the ongoing transition of wine integrity in the way that it's made, but in the way that it's communicated, the way that it's judged, the way that it's promoted, the way that it's sold, all of those elements of our vital industry that is so important to getting it right.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there's a big conversations and big ideas to throw about, but if they're not thrown about and they're not talked about, then we don't get any better. What would be your advice for young or new wine writers?
The thing that I have always aspired to is to identify a need and a demand and then work like a demon to fill that need, rather than going out and saying, I like what such and such is doing, I'll copy that. Not at all. Go out and say, okay, what is it that the world really wants in terms of wine writing? What is not being done at the moment? All of my topics that I've really taken on as my passion projects have been things that I looked at and thought, there isn't a book on do-it-yourself home cellaring in existence, but I've got some knowledge around this. Everybody's asking about it. I'll write the book. No one is answering the questions on closure technology. This is 20 years ago. And whether or not screw caps are the right closures, but the knowledge is out there. Let's put that all together. And then, as I mentioned before too, in 2010, there is no up-to-date champagne guide in print in English. Let's take that as an opportunity. And then my growth of my events around that too has been a chance to be able to present my Taste Champagne event to fill a need around champagne tastings for public and trade across the country. So my advice for people is do something where you see the need, you see the demand, the audience is chafing at the bit to get whatever it is you're trying to produce, and then work like a demon to make it happen.
Very, very good advice. Probably hard to follow, but I think that that is the perfect place to start is what are you offering and does the world need it? There's far too many people out there offering things we don't need, like opinions and
Yeah,
nasty
exactly.
thoughts. So it's good to have, it's good to ask yourself that question. With the amount of amazing things that you do, Michelin restaurants, tasting beautiful champagne in the vineyards, what do you love most about your job?
That's a very easy question. As a wine writer, it can be quite an isolating thing, and something which you do in my case in my basement at my computer for most of the day. But I've come to the thing I appreciate most about wine is as much as there is a fascinating connection with place, time, and people, there is a much more compelling thing because life is not about science. It's not about food and wine. Life is about relationships. And there is no better vehicle than the chance to sit down over a glass of wine with somebody in order to connect. It's not like taking a group to a corporate box at the football. It's not like going to the movies. It's about sitting down and having the chance in an aeons old tradition to enjoy food and wine. And that has become an increasing focus of what I've done in that I don't just travel to Champagne by myself, but I also take groups and have the opportunity to introduce them in small groups to the people who inspire me so much and to sit around the tables with the chef de carves and the principals of the companies and to host tastings in Australia and weekends and dinners. And that has become the majority of what I'm doing. I'm spending more time running events now than I'm writing about wine, although I still do a lot of both. Gosh, I'm probably, if you look at it on an hourly, weekly basis, I'm full-time as a wine writer and full-time as an events manager and presenter too. And that has become fortuitous not only from the point of view that it helps me to stay in touch with my audience. So I'm keeping it real because I've constantly got the people who are buying these wines in my ear, so that I'm writing about wine in a way that's relevant to them rather than just being immersed in my ivory tower with the winemakers all the time. But also, crucially, from a very practical and raw and honest point of view, you can't make a living as a wine writer these days to sustain a family. But as an events host and a tour host and everything else I'm doing at the same time, it's probably way too much for one person, but make hay while the sun shines, as I say. All of that makes the whole venture financially viable. And crucially too, because as a wine writer and a critic and a communicator, I purposely, from the outset, wanted to jealously guard my place of independence, which means that I never wanted to base my income on marketing wine, on importing wine, on selling wine, on retailing wine, on being a consultant for wineries in any way that the wineries would be paying me, because suddenly my credibility as an independent critic diminishes by perception and perhaps by reality if that's my main income source. So I somehow needed to cleverly come up with a business model whereby I could still be fully immersed in wine all the time because that's where I needed to maintain my focus, but to ultimately receive all of my income from the people I'm writing for. And as guests, they love buying my books and website subscriptions and everything else, but it needed to be more than that. So hosting events gave me the opportunity to tick all of those boxes. And having been a teacher, I love presenting, I love interacting with people, love the opportunity to share wine. So it all kind of worked in a convoluted way over a very long time, to the point now where I get to host events around the world and around Australia, and was loving that process and the way that it is intricately interwoven with everything I'm doing around writing and researching and communicating.
Totally amazing and a very humble answer as well. I'm going to ask you to hit me up with your 3 beverages for the rest of your life. What would they be and why? I'm not asking you to say one particular wine, but if you're going to, and it can be, look, let's say 3 drinks today. I know tomorrow you might change your mind and that's okay.
It's a great question and a difficult one to narrow down to just 3, but I will put it in terms of categories. And the first one is champagne, of course, because that's the wine that I find I can just drink And even over a whole dinner and after dinner, it's still refreshing and enlivening. And I just have a love for natural acidity in food and in wine, and cool regions really bring that out, and Champagne better than anywhere else. The second one I would have to say is Chardonnay as a still wine, because it's already encompassed in Champagne, of course, too. I think Chardonnay is the greatest white grape in the world, and I love white Burgundy and wish I could afford more of it. And I love the great wines of Tasmania and the Adelaide Hills and Margaret River in Australia. And the third one is very predictable. Your listeners will all know what I'm about to say, because if Chardonnay is the great white grape of the world and the great fundamental backbone of Champagne, then Pinot Noir, of course, is the great red grape and the great filler of the great Champagnes in terms of its marriage with Chardonnay. So Pinot Noir, the heartbreak grape, red Burgundy is one of my favourite things, and I can't drink much of it because I can't ever afford it, but I wish I could. And I love great Australian Pinot Noir, great New Zealand Pinot Noir, wines of Oregon. There's still Pinot Noirs increasingly of Champagne because it's getting warmer there. So very predictable answer, Champagne, Pinot and Chardonnay. And if I was allowed a fourth, it would have to be Tasmanian Sparkling. Just have to get that in there. Love it. Can't get enough of it. It's affordable, it's accessible, beautiful, and it's unique.
I then knew there was a reason why we like to hang out. Firstly, because we like to drink the same things.
We do. we have the right taste, clearly, because if you agree, then I must be on the right track, because you've got a good palate.
I want to add in a quote too here from the John Krakauer book Into the Wild, in which at the end, Krista McCandless, the character of the book, writes, "Happiness is only real when shared," which is something that I think you've very well articulated about the joys of your job. Tyson, every conversation that I have with you is weighted in gold. I'm always inspired to work harder, inspired to taste more, to share more, and to live life to the fullest. Thank you so much for your time. It has been a joy in my day, let alone the week. So thank you for your time.
And thank you too, Shanteh. And I need to throw in one little left of field element of what I do that's crucial to wrap up what we've been discussing. And that is that for me, the opportunity to give back is very important. And 25 years ago when I was a teacher, I'd have students coming into my office and saying, "We don't know who else to talk to about this." And excuse me for getting a bit emotional because it's really close to my heart. They'd say, "We've got friends who are at a party on the weekend who passed out, and we want to know how to support them and how to avoid the dangers of alcohol abuse." And these are all underage teenagers, of course. So that led to a lot of work with them and their families, their parents and the school and other schools, educating kids and their parents about safe practices around alcohol, which has allowed me now, as someone in the wine industry, to take that further. And 10 years ago, I established my charity Teen Rescue Foundation as an opportunity to rally the wine industry to put resources into supporting the incredible groups who are doing things with teenagers with alcohol abuse. And so for me, the opportunity to be able to help to rally the incredible energy and enthusiasm among wine producers around responsible drinking and setting a culture among our young people. And it's been a great pleasure over that decade to see the way in which the work of many, many different people. I'm just a very small player in this equation, but we've seen a change in the culture of Australian wine and alcohol consumption in general among teenagers, and it's been a real humbling privilege to be part of that process too. So just wanted to throw that in as something to alert your listeners to, that there's great work being done and more that we can do as well.
Yes, and my apologies. I actually had that in there, and I got carried away with my own personal pursuits.
So many wonderful topics to talk about. We can talk about this for hours.
I totally agree. It is our responsibility when we work in these realms to understand the damages and the challenges that comes with. I think that is incredible that you have, especially that insight into the teen mind, which is often where a lot of, danger zones are for growing adults, and just incredible work. And head over to Tyson's website to check out more. And Tyson, thank you again. And let's try and get together soon and put something in a glass in the same room.
Definitely. I look forward to that. Great credit to you, Shanteh. You're doing incredible things, and the rise and rise of your presence in the wine world has been something that has been a great inspiration to me personally over many years. And we've been talking for a very long time about the opportunity to connect, to put this conversation into the public realm. It's been a great joy to speak with you, and thank you for your sensitive approach and your insights and the way in which you're able to draw out these wonderful stories as you do from all of your guests so well. And it's a wonderful resource for the wine industry to have an extra level of depth to this communication that you exemplify so well. So thank you for the privilege, and bravo and well done.
Thank you, Tyson. Cheers to you.
Cheers. Thank you.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Stay tuned for more stories from the world of wine and drinks. Listen in every Thursday on your podcast app. Follow us on Instagram at overaglasspod and contact us at overaglass@deepintheweeds.com.au.